Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well, and I hope you're going to spoil yourself and get yourself a lovely glass of effervescent champagne, or a glass of cold wine, or cold drink, or perhaps even a cup of hot coffee. Whatever it is you're going to get, go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight, and it's going to warm the cockles of your heart. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, growing up, my grandmother was a sad, dispirited, desolate woman. It was as if she was a barren, isolated wilderness, longing for fresh rains to revive the dry wasteland of her despair. But in her case, the rain was not forthcoming. For many who knew my grandmother believed she was carrying an invisible weight upon her shoulders, weighing her down so heavily in life, overwhelming her with the burden of a great sobering grief that seemed to cling to her life steadfastly, like the barnacles on a turtle shell. I was only later, at the grand old age of 16, to personally discover how bad her heartbreak actually was. It was rooted far deeper than I could have ever envisaged, and this pain was steeped in a poignant entanglement of regret, disappointment, secrecy, shame, and even an unforgiveness that she had punished herself with for all these years. It was as if she daren't ever enjoy life, or surround herself with beauty, as others less fortunate than herself had needlessly had their lives stolen and extinguished from them long before their time. So for her it was almost morally wrong, or corrupt, so to speak, to surround herself with happiness at all, that she certainly felt she was unworthy to attain. My grandmother's late husband James was in the American Air Force, the kind of man who loved our great and mighty land, so much that he was willing to surrender his life to both God and country, without even a fleeting hesitation, as he was so proud to be American, and desirous to stand up for the beliefs of our founding fathers. I had secretly long suspected my grandmother's melancholia may have had a lot to do with the Second World War, when her husband James, who was on active duty between the years 1943 and 1945, was one of the victims of the Second World War. It would seem a third of the Allied forces were deployed at the time for active duty, having seriously been bogged down with far greater responsibility after Italy surrendered and Germany finally took over. My grandfather was involved in these bombing air raids over German cities. By all accounts, his team systematically targeted German transportation links and so forth. Unfortunately, my grandfather, who was flying a B-24 Liberator at the time, a long-range bomber, renowned for precision bombing raids, the best of its kind. Its accuracy was phenomenal and on target. It was with regret that the B-24 bomber carried with it a negative stigma that every pilot flying the craft was painfully all too aware of, which meant flying above enemy territory became significantly more precarious. Let's just say that every flight was undertaken with a great measure of trepidation. The B-24 bomber was often referred to as the flying coffin, as its greatest disadvantage was it only had one exit. This meant it was impossible to escape from a crippled B-24 in perilous life-threatening situations, which surreptitiously implied that your fate was left in God's hands. My grandfather had been bombing Gotha amidst a firestorm of anti-aircraft cannon shells, rockets, airburst bombs that had turned the sky into a shower of bullets, smoke and flak. It was a cantankerous storm in the heavens, so hellishly furious, with billowing black smoke, orange fireballs and ear-splitting noises, so loud that the ground heaved and groaned beneath the thunderous, unmerciful assault, while targeted buildings spewed up angrily the wrath of their foundations, spilling into the skies like molten lava from a volcano, with debris scattered everywhere like rugged grey confetti, littering the ground in a scene of great carnage, the footnote of war, a sight not for the faint-hearted to rest their eyes upon. Unfortunately, my grandfather's B-24 Liberator was blown up into clouds of smoke. He was killed instantly, but many of the lucky pilots, if you can call them that, limped back to England and America, with wounds far deeper than those you could physically see. Their lives forever tarnished by the grim realities and oppressive memories of a war, born out of the seeds of a shocking and vile prejudicial hatred, the likes of such that the world has never ever seen before. It would seem that my grandparents were very much in love. They were living at the time at my grandmother's parents' large Greek revival farmhouse in the heart of the West Virginian countryside. One day as my grandfather walked out of the farmhouse, he turned around, took my grandmother in his arms tenderly and said, "I shan't be coming back this time, but make sure you look after our 2 children," which at the time was my mother Pearl, who was 2, and her sister Diana, about 5. My grandmother had grabbed my grandfather and said, "What are you talking about? What do you mean you're not coming back? How can you say such a dreadful thing? How can you say such a thing? Do you know the power of words?" My grandfather had kissed her tenderly on the cheeks and said to her, "I will always love you. Please remember that. But I'm not coming back. I know it in here," he said, tapping his belly. "It's in my gut. I'm at peace with it. I've accepted my fate. You must also find peace with it." My grandmother was sobbing obstreperously. "Don't say that, James. You can't say that. You can't afford to be so pessimistic. You know that naturally invites disaster." The tears drenched my grandmother's clothes indignantly. She's trying to pull her husband back into the house, but he resists her, pushing her away gently, with a loving, firm hold that tells her quite clearly that he can't be persuaded to change his mind over this mission. He says, "I'm doing this for America, for our children's children. One day, generations of Americans will thank us for this freedom we are purchasing for them." It was later my grandmother's mother found her daughter, my grandmother, lying on the kitchen floor, curled up in a fetal position, with 2 dogs lying on either side of her, both licking her face tenderly, as if perceiving her insufferable pain, and offering her a measure of comfort. My grandmother had cried and cried, like she'd never cried before. I remember her telling me she didn't know she had so many tears to cry. She felt as if she could have filled a large pond with every drop of them, or given their saltwater content, she figured a rock pool by the ocean might have benefited from them. "Get off the floor, dear," my grandmother's mother had said, helping her daughter up off the ground. She was a sorry, wretched sight, her dress bedraggled and crumpled, her eyes red from crying so many tears. "James is not coming back," says my grandmother to her mother, in a deep hoarse croak, while she buried her head in her mother's cotton blouse, and wept and wept. Her mother comforts her, rubbing her back and trying to reassure her distressed daughter, who could not be comforted or consoled, for peace had left her heart the moment her husband had kissed her goodbye. She also knew in her gut he was right. He wasn't coming back. She would be left without a husband, her children without a father. This was so not what she wished for. She could personally wring Hitler's neck, throw him to the wolves if she was given the chance. He was responsible for this worldwide mess and calamity. The man was a monster. She despised him with every breath of her being. "Who's not coming back?" asked my grandmother's sister Amber, entering the room. "My husband isn't coming back." "Oh, for goodness sake, Pearl, give it a break, will you? Stop feeling so sorry for yourself. Men all over the world are dying in this war. It happens. James chose to become a pilot in the Air Force. Of course he's at risk of dying, but you knew that when you married him. It was a risk you took. Get over it, girl. You're going to have to learn to be a little bit tougher than you are. We're at war, and we have to be brave. That's just the way it is." "Now, Amber, I have had enough of your insolence. That is not a kind way to talk to your sister, is it? Your words are mean-spirited and hard-hearted. Where on earth is your compassion, young lady? Have you forgotten we're in this war together? We need to lift each other up in adversity, not crush each other like this." I think you need to wash out your mouth, young lady, with soap and water, and right now. Mind your words. We can only hope that all the Americans involved in this war will return home safely to us, of which I'm quite certain James will be one of them. My grandmother Pearl looks up at her mother, through tear-stained eyes. You don't understand, Mum, do you? James told me he has a gut feeling he's not coming back. He told me he loved me, that I need to take care of our children. My grandmother's face physically pales. If he said that, dear, then he's not coming back. I hate to say it, darling. Sometimes you know when your time is up. It's not the first time I've heard of people having a premonition of their own deaths. Perhaps it's a gracious gift from God, in order to help those that are leaving us finally say their goodbyes. I must admit, James gave me a very big goodbye before he left this morning, telling me to always take care of you, Pearl. I thought he was being rather intense. He kept telling me to give you strength, as you were going to need lots of it. I intend to be there for you, sweetheart, and that's a promise, she reassures her daughter. Whatever the future holds, we're going to be strong together. If James is fighting for us, we need to be strong for him too. But I don't understand. How could he know he's going to die? Pearl protests, her voice rising up to the high ceilings of the house, in a frantic shrieking sound, as her mother's sober words of bodeful reflection are not what she wants to entertain. In the same way, sweetheart, I knew you were a baby girl, long before you made your entrance into this world. Sometimes you just know things. You know the problem with the two of you is you're so damn superstitious, says Amber, her mouth turning into an upside-down skull. You know, hanging around the two of you is really like living in a mortuary. You're always saying, Hitler that, Hitler this, what's going to happen to our lives now that America has been thrown into the war? I mean, really, can't the two of you think about anything positive at all? You're not exactly riveting company right now, mooching over everything like a couple of grieving widows. For all you know, your husband will be back soon, Pearl. So get a grip, get over yourself. You and Mum, you're pathetic, feeling so sorry for yourselves all the time. I'm sorry, but I have to say it as it is. Aren't the wives of military men supposed to be made of tougher stuff than you are, Pearl? I can't honestly see what James saw in you at all. My word, Amber, you do know how to kick a dog when it's down, don't you? You can be quite cold and unfeeling sometimes. As I keep telling you, compassion for your sister's plight might actually be rather nice. We're all naturally upset about this war, Amber, even if you're not. There's been lots of rationing, especially on sugar, when we need it the most. We're all down. It hasn't been easy on any of us. Excuse me if we have hangdog expressions on our faces, but war has a way of getting you down. The rationing hasn't helped either. It's getting worse, so there's not exactly much to party about at the moment. But after the war is over, we shan't stop celebrating. I'm sure of that. I've got a feeling that the parties around here aren't going to stop. Suffice to say, a short while after my grandmother's husband James had left for his air raid mission over enemy turf in the B-24 Liberator he was flying, she had been notified about her husband's death, which did not come as a surprise, given her husband's conviction that he would not be returning, and her own gut feelings concerning the matter. I was to learn from my mother that my grandmother Pearl had never got over her husband's death. Every night she went to bed with her gilded photograph of James, in his navy uniform, by her bedside, and now in her early 80s, this routine had not changed. My mother told me once that her parents had a very loving relationship from what she had established from her own mother, but being only 2 at the time, she had no memories of her father. There was a large part of her that believed her mother was not only devastated by her husband's death, but angry with him for leaving her with her 2 children, especially since he knew he was going to die. She had never forgiven him for that. My grandfather James wrote to my grandmother Pearl a letter which read the following, which she received after his death. It had been given to Pearl's mother to give to her daughter when he did not return home from active duty. It read the following: My darling Pearl, if you are reading this letter, you will know by now I am not coming home, and that I am now deceased.
But do not grieve for me, my lovely. Don't shed a tear, but fill your life with heartfelt joy, with things to smile about. For our lives on this earth are, in my opinion, far too short. So in the long term, sorrow is a wasted emotion. It is the good things in life I went to war for, the things we often overlook and so often take for granted, the things that make us incredibly happy as Americans. Everything good in life comes with a price. Nothing is ever for free. Never forget that, Pearl. Our freedom is a gift of God, and if we have to fight for the freedom of our great and noble land, then sacrifices have to be made. And as is the case in every war, with every sacrifice, there are inevitably casualties. I am a casualty of this war. But remember, never was a man more pleased to lay down his life for his fellow American and country as I am. Of course, I wish it had not come to this. War is cruel, is no respecter of persons. It's like a disease, that if it's not amputated, will spread to the rest of the body, or, as is the case in war, destroy the freedoms of the world as we know it. All I know is our marriage and our 2 children are the most precious things in my life. I wish I could have been around for you, and to raise our children. But you all have my heart, and I will watch over you from the other side, until one day we meet again. Know this, Pearl, my love. For you, my love will never fade, nor can it be blemished or soiled from this war. All my fondest love to you, James.
Let me take you to the beginning of my extraordinary story that revolves around my grandmother, as you might come to suspect, and leads to an incredulous, outlandish encounter that even I marvel about, all these years later. Sometimes I stop and ponder, did that really happen? But I assure you, it most certainly did. This is a story that is rooted in a love story from the Second World War, a broken heart, hidden secrets, a shocking revelation that would make your hair curl, the kind of story that Universal Studios would dream to show at the box office if they got the chance. The irony is that this story would never have unravelled like an ancient scroll spilling out all its clandestine secrets if both me and my brother had not fortuitously spent 6 weeks with my grandmother. It was almost as if the hands of time were itching for this moment, for an unhealthy secret to be purged and unearthed, a secret that needed to be shared, a secret that had brought with it a tsunami of regret and grief. At the time, shortly before the story rolled out into our time space, me and my brother Earl were living in the eclectic east side of New York City, with both our parents, not too far from the famous Katz's Delicatessens, well known for its phenomenal sandwiches, filled with dense carved layers of meat, and Domino Park. It's the part of town where you see gritty galleries, tenement-style buildings, upscale apartment blocks, and elegant avant-garde boutiques. It is at night that this part of town becomes alive and buzzing, very hip, attracting young crowds to trendy bars, music venues and restaurants alike. The Jewish part of the area is through Orchard Street, on the Lower East Side. My parents rented a very well-appointed, fully furnished apartment in this area, where we lived with its densely urban feel. But over the years, apart from Christmas and Easter, we never got to see our grandmother Pearl very much, which was a deep regret of my mother's, although she did speak to Pearl every day on the telephone. My grandmother lived close to the town of Somerville in West Virginia, in Nicholas County, located in the mountains, an 8-hour drive from our home. It was the original Greek Revival family home that she'd inherited from her parents after their death. But as for her sister Amber, no one knew what had become of her. Many assumed that after the war she'd moved away, lost touch with her family roots. But from what I'd learnt, she was not a very likeable character, and her apathetic indifference towards her blood relatives surprised no one. She'd always been a snarky type, with a devilish disregard for people, and a temper rather inclined to get somewhat inflamed. When my mother informed me that she and my dad were going abroad for 6 weeks, and that we were to go and stay with our grandmother Pearl, I was thrilled. I adored the countryside and escaping the hub and bub of city life. It pleased me greatly, even at 16 years old. because I appreciated the transfixing beauty of the natural world. In truth, I don't think my brother Earl was keen about spending time in nature, not like I was. Ostensibly, he was certain we could become easily bored out there. I mean, what was there to do in the country? By all accounts, even the small town with a tiny mall, a theatre, a scattering of restaurants seemed mundane to him, compared to the excitement of New York. My grandmother's farmhouse was tucked away in the heart of a valley, surrounded by the theatrical views of the mountains and complemented by vast clusters of ubiquitous trees. Let's just say, everywhere you looked, there were trees. But then that is West Virginia for you. As the taxi driver drove down the long precipitous gravel road, laced with a plethora of rocks that rolled under his rubber tyres, leading to my grandmother's farmhouse, I had to stop to draw breath for a moment. There are no words to describe the transfixing views that grabbed my attention like a very big nudge. Stretching out before us were the undulating oceans of viridescent resplendence, where manicured green grass folds so seamlessly into sumptuous verdant trees that plunder the skyline in a stately regal repose, their boughs hemorrhaging a confetti of green leaves that tumble over the branches, while billowing countryside rises and falls in steep voluptuous mountainous inclines, so that every single part of the countryside is artfully sculptural. Nothing is flat, insipid or uninspiring. It is arrestingly beautiful. The big blue sky seems so large compared to New York, hovering above our heads like a cobalt blue canopy that stretches out into the ether for an eternity, dappled with candy floss fluffy white clouds. It's all just so stunning. Soon we reach the bright white house that glitters like mother of pearl, made to resemble white marble against the sparkling green of the countryside. The house is an 1820 Greek Revival farmhouse. Well, so I've been told. But then again, I'm not au fait with Greek architecture. Let's just say it's a pleasing symmetrical shape, rather reminding me of a Greek temple, with its columns on front of the house that support the ceiling of the long porch. There's a window in the pediment, highly decorative cornices, pediments, and unadorned friezes. The taxi rolls up to the side of the house and parks. The taxi driver opens the car door for me, and of course my brother. He moves to the trunk to pull out the bright pink suitcase of mine and my brother's more colourful one, aligned with squiggles of all American states on it. An elderly woman gracefully emerges from the house. I know this is Pearl, the grandmother of whom I'm only briefly acquainted. Seeing her again brings on a sudden bashful reserve and a shyness that catches me off guard. I'm not usually shy. I suppose the fact that I've only met her a handful of times may have something to do with my reticence. My brother is flushing a bright pink colour as my grandmother moves towards us to embrace us in an effusive warm hug. I know my brother loathes hugs. He's possibly physically squirming in his awkwardness. Suffice to say, she carries herself with an elegant gait, despite her advancing years. She's a neat woman, dressed in a long tweed skirt, a white shirt with a cameo brooch clutching the top button under her collar. Her white hair is neatly swept away from her face, the length pinned back into a sizable bun, suggesting that my grandmother is blessed with lots of hair. Her face betrays a healthy skin, with a fullness most uncommon in women of her age, but the crow's feet around her eyes are etched into the skin quite fiercely. Perhaps this is what might rarely reveal her age, along with the layered crinkles on her neck. Whether she is genuinely pleased to see us or not, I can't be sure, but she does give my brother a shocked look, as if she's seen a ghost. "Forgive me, Earl, but my word, you're the splitting image of your grandfather James, when he was a young man." At this my brother lets out a cheeky grin.
"Thanks. I hear he was quite handsome."
"Oh, he was more than handsome, dear. Your grandfather was a hero. Let me just say this to your young ears. Beauty is fleeting. It is soon forgotten. But character is indelible. It's always remembered. It lasts forever. Your grandfather, my dear boy, he was an American hero." My grandmother possesses that charming age-old English reserve that many Americans adopted in the older generations, where she blushingly buries her emotions like a squirrel hoarding its nuts for winter, and is guarded in her approach towards us like a female doe that is very cautious around people. It's as if we're strangers that she needs to watch with a wary hesitancy, when we're actually her grandchildren. We watch the taxi driver leaving the premises, which he does with a begrudging reluctance. I get the impression he wouldn't have minded being invited in for a drink. He dutifully gives us a polite wave, climbs back into his truck, drives away with a fast acceleration, down what I consider to be a dicey, turbulent, choppy driveway. Our grandmother leads us into the house. She tells us to plonk our suitcases in the hallway, which we do with little encouragement, glad to be relieved of the heavy weight. Come into the kitchen for some homemade lemonade, she tells us. I am surprised, if not a wee bit disappointed, by the interiors of Pearl's house, that really could be resplendent if style and colour had been artfully engaged. But Pearl's house is fitted with sturdy, practical furnishings that are severe in their style, unglamorous, robust and practical, as if elegant style and sophistication have been wilfully abandoned with a deliberate intent. I discern with a degree of bewilderment that dark colours have been recruited in the rooms, in both the furnishings and drapery, and even the artwork on the walls is oppressive, where pictures of thunderstorms, deserts with a scattering of cactuses, and a barren wilderness decorate the walls, along with a few contemporary art pieces that look like an angry artist on a bad hair day, who was having a row with his wife, simply flung a plethora of paint at a canvas, in splashes of reds, oranges and blacks. Then he signed his name at the bottom of the canvas. The pictures are hostile. They make me cringe. The only way I can describe the house to you is on the inside it's joyless. It's almost as if the house reveals my grandmother's current state of mind, as if an unexpressed, dormant sadness is cloaking the house in the veil of her grief, as if the house is one large weeping widow that is bathing in her own melancholia. Perhaps in the furnishings and decor, my grandmother is expressing the hidden tentacles of her pain.
By Jove, my brother whispers to me, the inside of this house is like a morgue. Such dark carpets, floors, dark curtains, mahogany furniture. You'd never believe this was a woman's place, would you? And those pictures on the walls scream with anger. I'm no artist, but whoever painted that picture, he says, pointing to the big piece of contemporary art above the fireplace, let's just say they were in a vile mood.
July 1937. James is excited to meet what he hopes will be his potential in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Hemingway. In a matter of weeks, he has fallen head over heels in love with their daughter Pearl, whom he's decided he wanted to marry. But it was best to get acquainted with the family first, before he presumptuously asked Pearl's father permission to marry his daughter. If the truth be told, when he first laid eyes on Pearl, he knew she was the one. She reminded him of a very delicate, rare wild flower in the meadow that needed to be handled with the utmost of care, due to her fragility. He loved the fact that Pearl was oblivious to her own attractiveness. She was shy and demure, gentle like a doe.
Who is that lovely young lady? He asked his friend at the dance, being hosted by an animal charity in the town hall. Oh, that's Pearl Hemingway. Would you like an introduction? Yes, please, he'd said. On that night he danced with Pearl, and looked into her timorous eyes. His heart had missed a beat. The chemistry between the two of them had been undeniably electric, the attraction mutual. They had stared into each other's eyes, unable to look away. Pearl was very pretty, her face elegantly adorned with a curtain of blonde wispy hair that could look white in certain lights, a porcelain complexion, a slender, lanky body that was delicate like she was, but she moved with grace and elegance like a ballerina, with a back as straight as a pencil. At first Pearl had been a tight rosebud in their relationship, reluctant to open up, but that had intrigued and mystified James all the more, as he had skillfully, very carefully pulled back the petals, one by one. He knew in Pearl he'd found a precious diamond, and women like Pearl were rare, hard to come by. He had struck gold. When James' friends drops him off at Pearl's family farmhouse for luncheon, he is struck with a sense of déjà vu, as if he's been here before. But that's not possible. It's a disturbing feeling that he can't shake off, that leaves him feeling more than a little confounded. I'll pick you up later, his friend chuckles. Good luck, James, with the parents.
James ebulliently climbs out of the truck. He watches his friend driving away. The truck jolts and heaves over a hostile, uneven driveway, littered with rocks, dappled with fallen leaves. This place gives him an unsettling feeling that brings on an unpleasant chill that spirals down his spine. Why does he feel as if he's been here before? The house is absolutely magnificent, the great embodiment of Greek revival architecture, nestled between the undulating curls and folds of the spectacular, viridescent West Virginian countryside. It looks like a gleaming white pearl in an oyster shell. James walks to the front door steadily, surprised to find that his hands are actually shaking. Luckily, before he even knocks at the door, Pearl has dutifully flung it open. She greets him with a large, wide smile and an effusive, warm hug that seems to hijack the angst he was beginning to feel. "Don't worry about my parents," she whispers. "They're great people. They won't bite. You'll love my mother and my dad too." Pearl had been absolutely right. The lunch had gone seamlessly, and Pearl's father had ushered him into the study to have a one-on-one chat later that afternoon. Mr. Hemingway pours James a scotch in a sturdy glass, sliding it over to him on the oakwood desk.
"I'll come right to the point, young man. No point in beating around the bush. I like you an awful lot. I can see you're very good for my daughter. But what are your intentions with her? That's what I would like to know." "Sir, I will be straight with you. I'm head over heels in love with your daughter. I would very much like to marry her. I came here today with the full intention of asking you for your blessing in this regard." Mr. Hemingway is chuffed. His back straightens. He takes a swig of his scotch for Dutch courage. "Well, what's keeping you, young man? When are you going to ask her? There's no time like the present. It's clear to me you're both very much in love." "What, sir? You want me to ask her now?" "Absolutely. Why don't you ask her in the living room?" he says, beckoning James into the room. "What are you two grinning about?" asked Mrs. Hemingway, looking up at her husband nonplussed. "The two of you look like you're scheming something. I want to know what you're up to." "I think James here would like to ask Pearl something." James realises he doesn't have a ring yet, but that matter can be attended to later. It's only a minor detail that can soon be addressed and rectified. On second thoughts, maybe it'll mean Pearl can choose her own ring, as women he knows can be very particular in this regard. With a pounding heart that is racing through his chest and a whirling head, he wastes no time in kneeling down on the floor. He's looking up into Pearl's eyes with a devoted adoration, while Pearl's parents are excitedly clenching their hands together, their twinkling eyes savouring in this memorable moment. It is almost as if the room is holding its breath, as if it's recording this event that seeps into the cellular structures of the walls and is imprinted on the fragment of time. James takes Pearl's elegant hand in his and smiles at her warmly, so that Pearl's heart begins to melt. "Pearl Hemingway, from the moment I met you, you stole my heart. Will you do me the honour of becoming my wife?" Mrs. Hemingway is cupping her hands around her mouth in a shocked delight, while Mr. Hemingway's beam is so large it might just bounce off his face if he dares stretch those zygomatic muscles too far. It is Pearl's eyes that grow round. She emulates her mother by gasping. Then she throws herself into James' arms, hugging him so tightly. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, yes, yes." Everyone begins to excitedly hug each other, and Mr. Hemingway welcomes James to the family. "As far as I'm concerned, you're already my son."
All of a sudden, footsteps on the landing stroll over to the living room. A figure is standing in the doorway. It's Amber, Pearl's sister, who is physically scowling. "What the heck is going on in here?" "Oh, Amber, we have wonderful news," said her mother, dashing up to her daughter. "Meet your brother-in-law, James. He's only just asked Pearl to marry him. Isn't this so exciting? He is going to be your brother-in-law very, very soon." It is when Amber looks up at James, and James looks up at Amber. Their eyes lock in recognition. James begins to freeze. His blood goes cold. His heart is pounding. Oh my God, he's met this woman before. He's been in this house. He's slept in her bed. No wonder everything seems so familiar.
when he arrived here for luncheon with the Hemingway family. No wonder he felt as if he'd been here before, because he had. This revelation makes his skin crawl, and the memory comes flooding back like a haunting nightmare that he didn't want to confront. This couldn't be happening, could it? Please, please, no. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night. Until then, good night and goodbye.